the date today? Tuesday, August 25th? Today's the 23rd. 23rd? Test, yeah, we're on. So before we get started, how many of you have seen this movie, Crazy Rich Asians? Did you see it? Oh my gosh, if you haven't seen that movie, it's a fun movie to go see. So I'd encourage you to see it. But it also will teach you a whole lot about emotional intelligence. So I encourage you for that reason to go as well. Andy, have you seen it? You know, this is a good one. This is a fun one. So it's not as quite as intense as Mission Impossible, but it's pretty good. So we finished up the class on Tuesday talking about this challenge that I posed around tipping. Does everybody remember that? And I challenged you to think about tipping and how much time you actually spent at the table versus the cook, and was it fair that the server received, right, I think it was about $400 an hour we came up with, the equivalent of that, versus the 9, 50, 10, even 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 for the cook, yeah? Who arguably had spent more time. And you know, there's something I forgot to mention last week that I want to mention today that will go into effect next week. As part of us using this class as a transition from academia to the real world, when you come into this class, the expectation is that you will remain in this class for the entire time until we're excused. If your CEO was holding a meeting, would you get up and walk out in the middle of it? Okay, so we're going to start, so you have to think and plan and be disciplined, right? So we'll start that on Tuesday. Everybody good with that? All right, and if people aren't in class today, please let them know. And thanks for your name tags. If you don't have one, if you do have it and you just forgot to put it up, please put it up. If you don't have one, try to remember that for Tuesday. Did everybody discover Blackboard? Everybody find the syllabus, schedule, got a chance to look through that, read about the papers, the presentations? All right, good. How many of you did your post? We have a post due? Yeah. All right, great. And you found the reading packet material because you'll need that for next week. Yeah, and a little bit today. Everybody? All good. We'll thank Spencer for that. He's hunting a lost purse at the moment. All right. So, the plan today is I want to keep talking about critical thinking, review just a little bit about what you read and researched, and then we'll have another discussion like we did Tuesday for Samir's benefit, because he really liked that concept. Yeah, you did. Okay, so we're going to keep doing that. And then at the end, the last 20 minutes of class today, I'm going to give you an exercise to do that is all about critical thinking. And it's also can be a lot of fun. So you'll do it individually and then as a team, and then we'll talk about the results of it in class on Tuesday of next week. You don't have to do anything to prepare for next Tuesday's class, except this. How many of you are familiar with track changes on Word? Track changes. None of you, come on. You guys are all grown up with technology, right? Somebody tell me about track changes. Okay.
If somebody were to send me a document and ask me to look over it and edit it, I could make my edits. If I turn on track changes, I can make my edits, and then you will be able to see everything.
That's exactly right. It's in the top toolbar, Word, right? If you open Word, it's in the top toolbar. It's under the review function. You'll see review. Click on review. You'll get a drop-down menu. And one of the things that will drop down is track changes. You turn track changes on, and then if Haley and I are collaborating on a paper, it will track her changes in one color, my changes in another. We can send notes to each other on the margin of the paper. It will show deletions, additions. you have to get to know how to use that tool. So before Tuesday's class, become familiar with the track changes tool. There's some great videos on YouTube how to use it. Spend some time with that before class. Same thing with Google Docs. How many of you are familiar with Google Docs? It's cold in here. All right, if you're not familiar with Google Docs, please get that way by the time class starts on Tuesday. The reason I like Google Docs is because you can use track changes inside Google Docs and you can see the changes instantaneously. So if you're on the phone with each other or FaceTime or whatever it is, you guys, your Google Hangouts, whatever it is, you guys can see the changes immediately, right? So the point I'm making to you is teamwork is a big deal. And I expect you to learn how to collaborate. A lot of people will be working remotely in your future. You might work remotely, and you need to be able to use those tools to collaborate. So the expectation on your papers is that you will use some type of collaboration technique like Google Docs and track changes, all right? And we'll talk more about it on Tuesday. But that's the expectation. Everybody good? All right, so that's for Tuesday. For today, I wanted you to think about critical thinking and thinking about tipping. And let's finish that conversation up. What happened to Zach? Zach! I stopped by your place the other day. You weren't there. All right, Zach, did you think about what we talked about?
You know what? I gave it some thought.
And?
My justification is going to stay the same.
Yeah,
For the most part.
sure.
I definitely see both sides of the argument.
Good.
And I see how it works in other countries like Europe and Asia. Where's some other countries?
Australia, New Zealand, they don't have tipping. Yeah.
You know what, though?
We're one of the few countries that actually has tipping so ubiquitous, so pervasive. Yeah. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but everybody that comes and does something for me wants a tip. My plumber wants a tip. I'm like, dude, you put a sink in. If they don't want a tip, they want to upsell me. Right? So it's gotten a little excessive. That's a good word. Thank you, Cassidy. It's gotten, in my opinion, it's gotten excessive. But I appreciate the fact that you were willing to think about it from different perspectives and to consider the fact that it does work in other places. Yeah? But I want to get down to the equitable conversation around the cook versus the server. Colin, I know you kind of had a pretty strong opinion about the pro-tipping perspective. Is that fair? Yeah. Did you get the chance to think about the inequitableness, and you may not feel it's inequitable, between the cook and the server?
I did, and I 100% agree with the idea of, I actually kind of think that the whole idea of removing tipping and moving to minimum wage is wrong. It should be opposite. Line cooks should be heavily increased on their wages because the amount of workload that they have is significantly higher than servers. Given not every single restaurant is like that. Some restaurant servers have a lot of stuff to do. Some restaurant servers walk in, don't do anything except just write an order down. Whereas for the most part, cooks, line cooks, prep cooks have a tremendous amount of work to be done. So I think that changing the wage on that portion and the back of house for general is more important than worrying about the front of house.
Front of that. And you realize that, and just so we're clear, and everybody's on the same page, when we talk about these businesses that have gone no tipping, they don't just increase the wage of the back of the house. They significantly, so waiters typically make $16 to $18 an hour, not minimum wage. And not all waiters make $200, $300, $400 an hour, right? Some barely make the minimum. And what's the minimum wage today? $7.25 an hour. And the law is clear, and you understand that, right? It's a tip credit wage. Now, so first of all, the business, if you're getting paid $2.13 an hour as a server, and let's say you go to work one day and you don't make any tips, the business has to make up the difference between $2.13 an hour and $7.25 an hour. Everybody understands that. The other challenge we're having is that the law, when it was enacted, Miss Kansas City? It's all right, what are you reading? You shopping on Facebook? Not Facebook, you wouldn't be shopping, but you're doing something. But anyway, were you here the first day of class? No. You weren't here the first day of class, and you're not paying attention to me now? I didn't ask you that. I asked you, you weren't here the first day of class, and now you're not paying attention to me? Huh. Why don't you close up that laptop, because we don't allow mobile devices in this class, and why don't you come right down here and sit right here, and this is going to be your seat from now on. You and I are going to get to know each other really well. Okay? Where was I? The minimum wage. Thank you very much. So it's the law says that the tip credit is supposed to be 50% of the minimum wage. So when the tip credit law was enacted in the 60s, the minimum wage was $4.25 an hour. That's why the tip credit is $2.13 an hour. But the minimum wage today, Colin, is what? Now think about that. The minimum wage in the 60s was $4.65 an hour, $4.25. And it's only $7.25 an hour today. But what has not happened? The tip credit hasn't risen like it was supposed to originally considered under the law. Why not? Well, yeah, that's one way to look at it. What's another way to look at it? It certainly increased. It has. But why hasn't the law been updated, or why haven't they been held accountable? What happens in our political, economic society? Exactly. The restaurant lobby is pretty significant, right? And they go in and they say, hey, you need to leave it at $2.13 because we're going to make up the minimum wage anyway, right? But it's not quite the same. So it's a fascinating area, and it's one that poses a great many questions. But the equitableness argument, I think, is the most challenging one for the pro-tipping advocates to justify, or to be unable to reconcile with the tipping the front of the house. So I just encourage you to think about it more. Now, let's shift gears then. And what we're talking about, tell me your name? Madison. Madison, when you come in on Tuesday, you're going to need a name tag. Like, look around, you'll see others. Will you do that for me? Thank you very much. So, I asked you to study critical thinking. Yes? What did you learn? Alessandra, you want to start us off? Has how many? 7. Wow. And you know what they are? I know some of them. Lay them on us. Having a bias. We talked about that the first day, right? Did you recognize that when you immediately heard the question? Did your mind immediately take you to your position? And we all have that visceral reaction when we hear something. We immediately go to what we know, right? But what you're trying to do is recognize that and not let that internal instinct drive your immediate outcome. You may ultimately get there still, but you're going to be much better off with your choices and your positioning if you'll take a minute and go, wait a minute, I've got a little bit of a conflict here. I'm biased. I depend on tips for my living. If they went away, right, I would be challenged because I have a lifestyle that I like to support and I don't want to go, and I've worked hard for it. Do you see how all that fits? And all that's going through your subconscious quickly, and immediately what do? We make our decision, hey, what about this is the way it is, right? Just be mindful of that internal inherent bias. And it works the other way as well. Manuel, can you see that, like for instance, when Colin and Zach were talking about it, as an external party, you need to be able to recognize that when they're expressing their opinion and their perspective, that they might have an internal bias. Fair? So we look at it both ways, just like emotional intelligence is just not understanding our emotions, but it's a willingness to understand others' emotional perspective as well. Got it? All right. Excellent. What else we got?
One's credibility.
How do we assess credibility? Chelsea, you want to chime in on this? How do we assess credibility of a person? How do you do it?
For me personally, it's a matter of where they come from and their experiences with everything like that. If someone has an opinion, now everybody has an opinion on everything. That's inevitable. But if you've never experienced it, I don't take you as credible as somebody who has experienced it.
I think that's a fair point. How many of you would agree with that? Okay. So experience helps us establish credibility for a subject matter expert, right? So if Manuel wanted to talk about winemaking, but had never been in winemaking, had never made any wine, never grown any grapes, and Ryan was going to talk to us about winemaking, but he's been in the business for 10 years, which one are we going to have a higher level of credibility? Ryan, right? So experience is a big thing. What else drives credibility? Malik? Knowledge, right? Subject matter. Do they come across as understanding the concepts, right? What else drives credibility? Yeah, and I've forgotten your name.
Helma.
That's right, Helma from intro, yes.
Reputation.
Reputation certainly does. Very good. What else? Level of education. Yes, sir. You know what? It's interesting. A lot of people, if somebody has a lot of money, like you watch Shark Tank, and how many of you think those people have a lot of credibility? Just because they're on Shark Tank, right? A lot of people do. I think it's a fair point, and you prefaced it very well. From your perspective, it's not necessarily accurate, but I think in our society, we do that, right? Have you come to understand that there's a significant difference between opinion and fact? And is it fair to say that people that use facts, verifiable facts, should have more credibility than those that just rely upon their opinion? Is that fair? Okay, I hope you see that. Facts are based on evidence, credible evidence in science. Opinion is just, I think the world is flat. Right? So it's important at this stage in your life that you begin to understand to listen from an assessment standpoint about credibility, identifying inherent bias, so you can identify valid, accurate information, factual-based information, scientifically validated information versus just opinion. It's crucial for a leader. Opinion-based leadership is just by the seat of your pants. Factual-based leadership and credible leadership will provide respect for you from your employees. And that's ultimately what you're looking for. Alexandra, back to you.
Another one has something to do with assumptions.
How many of us have ever made an assumption and gotten us in trouble? We all have. So look, as part of the emotional intelligence conversation, which we're going to have kind of every day, if you make quick judgments or you make assumptions which are similar, you're going to get yourself in trouble. let's say that you go, how many of you work at a hotel? All right. And those of you that don't, just get this picture. Put it in your imagination. You work at a hotel, and you go into the hotel break room. And there are 3 or 4 people in that break room, and you walk in, and they're whispering, giggling, and laughing. And then the minute you walk in, there's dead silence. What's the first thing that goes through your mind? They're talking about you or me, right? So how big does our ego have to be to think that out of 6 billion people in the world, those 3 people have nothing better to do than to talk about you? And yet, where does our egocentric, self-absorbed, and I'm not being critical, we all have that, where does our egocentric, self-absorbed, mental, subconscious take us? To that exact thought. It's all about us. And then, what happens to the rest of your day? See, then you go into your CSI mode. And you text somebody that was part of the group and you go, hey, looks like you guys are having fun in there. What was that about? Trying to find out what they were saying, right? And in reality, they weren't talking about you. The odds of them talking about you are slim and none, and slim is gone. But that's an assumption that you made. That's a quick judgment that you came to. Do yourself a favor. Eliminate assumptions and quick judgments from your life. Your world will be much more peaceful and productive. But in order to do that, you have to shift from this egocentric, self-absorbed filter to an objective filter. Okay? Some of you are 1 second. Madison, right? Madison, do me a favor, close your laptop, because we're not going to use it. If you want to take notes, I can get you a piece of paper and a pencil if you'd like that. And just so you know, we record everything so you can listen to it again on the podcast. You can go back and pick up the first day of class as well if you're interested. Some huge part of stereotyping. That's why I want you to go see that movie. Crazy Rich Asian. I mean, it's great lessons in what can go wrong when you stereotype and make judgments. Yeah. Great point. So, there's a book. I'll refer you to some books from time to time. You can go to, if you have trouble finding this book, I have a website, stephenbarth.com. It's totally free. But if there's a reading list, suggested reading list, and one of the books is called The 4 Agreements. The 4 Agreements is a book by Miguel Ruiz, a writer from Mexico who bases his philosophy on the Tolteca Indians. And he gives you 4 agreements you should have with yourself. And one of them is to not make assumptions and to not judge others. That is becoming emotionally evolved, is learning to do at least those 2 things. It will save you a lot of time and energy in your life. It also will bring you a lot of peace. It will. What's next? You remember another one? You can get some help. You've done really well. You want some help? We got Joshua down here. Is that okay? You'll pass the baton. Joshua.
Filtering out relevant and irrelevant information.
Excellent. Say it out loud.
Being able to identify relevant and irrelevant information.
Exactly. So, back to our tipping example. Can somebody give me an example of relevant versus not relevant or irrelevant information? Darinka. I get it right? It's a good day.
That has to do with like the tipping.
That has to do with tipping. Do you think about it? It could be something we said, or it could be something we haven't talked about yet.
I think the relevant one would be like
Relevant?
relevant,
Yep.
yeah, how other countries do it. Actually, that could be more relevant.
No, I think that could be relevant. Yeah, clearly. I think it's fair to say that, look, this is successful in other places. I think that's a fair point. Does everybody agree? That would be relevant to the conversation? Yeah, if we're going to be global, I think it would be relevant. Very good. Somebody come up with an irrelevant comment. Zach.
There's a standard that 20% should be an automatic tip.
Yeah, I think that's kind of irrelevant to the conversation of whether tipping is equitable for the front of the house, back of the house, and our questions. Very fair point. Yeah. Deborah.
I think it's relevant to mention how much people make when managers who get paid by salary.
That doesn't impact the tipping, that particular question that we talked about, right? That's not really relevant. Yeah, very good. It's interesting because it means that people that make a lot of tips, like Zach and Colin, are going to have hard time transitioning to a full-time job with a salary. But that's a whole different issue than what we were talking about. Is that fair? That's your point. I got it. All right. Anything else on the critical thinking side?
Was another one being able to look at different perspectives?
That's the key. In order to think critically, you have to be willing to look at different perspectives. So in our conversation were Zach and Colin, who were very strong advocates for tipping, but did they listen quietly to other perspectives? Did they consider them? Yeah. They can come to their own conclusions. That's fair. But you have to be willing to listen to other people's perspectives. All right? You got that? So when you think today, try to remember these concepts to help you identify fact-based information, relevant information, unbiased information. Try not to make assumptions about things. Try not to stereotype people. Try not to come to quick judgments. That will help you assess the credibility and the validity of the information that's coming your way. And you can do that when you're reading something. You can do that when you're having a conversation. You can do that when you're watching news. And give me some examples of when you can use these concepts, all of these concepts, in a leadership capacity in a hospitality industry. Yes, ma'am, Doreen.
So, like, something I learned was that to, like, think critically, we have to move from our cognitive way of thinking, which is, like, based off our experiences,
Right.
into more, like, evaluating and analyzing, like, the problems that we're being faced with so that we can, like how you say, really look at the evidence and the facts rather than, like, our biased opinion or, like, stuff like that.
Very good. So it's, as she pointed out, it's moving away from just our experience, our perspective, and a willingness to broaden the scope of information that we consider before we make a choice or a decision or a judgment. Very good. All right, so let's put it into practice. So you are the GM of a restaurant. And Ethan, I'm going to use you if you don't mind, and I'm going to use Cassidy because I know both of you, and I think you can handle this. But everybody else is oh no, let's do it differently. This side of the room, have worked with Cassidy for the last 3 years. Strike that. I'm not going to. It just dawned on me, this might not be the best. Come here for just a second. I probably let the cat out of the bag as it is, so I don't know, but I apologize. I was going to use a Me Too example. Are you okay with that?
Yeah,
You sure?
that's totally fine.
Okay. Okay, well, all right. So you have all worked with Cassidy, right? Ethan has only been working there for a couple of weeks. He's the new chef. Sous chef. Everybody know what a sous chef is? Assistant chef. He's darn good, highly acclaimed. Lucky to have him. Cassidy's one of the better servers out front. Cassidy alleges that Ethan made some unwanted sexual advances toward her, including some unwanted touching and language. You guys are the GM, all of you collectively. You can handle this, Ethan. I know you wouldn't do that. Your wife would kill you if you did. So, first of all, you hear this through the grapevine. Without implementing your critical thinking skills, what's your first reaction? Fire the sous chef. Sorry, Ethan. Corey?
It depends if you're credible with Cassie is credible, then you believe Cassie.
Your initial thought would be go to Cassidy, right? I mean, you know her. We talked about experience. We talked about working with people. We tend to give them the benefit of the doubt. Is that right? Because that's our comfort zone, and we're friends. But is being friends with Cassidy, that in and of itself, is that relevant to what a GM needs to think about? Okay. What are the GMs thinking?
Investigate.
Patrick says we got to investigate. Why?
Because if we jump to assumptions, I mean, we don't want to, I mean, yes, we want to believe her, but at the same time, we have to investigate as GM.
Is a false claim possible today? Is that another reason to not go to a snap judgment? Okay. Corey just made a great point. I've been friends with Cassidy for 2 years. But do I find her credible? Right? And what would lead you to believe whether or not you found her credible or not? Keep going. Dig deeper into what establishes credibility or character of one's character that establishes their credibility. Okay? Help me go. I'm pushing you a little bit. You're right on target, but what types of things did Cassidy do or not do to drive your judgment as to whether or not she's a credible person? Let me give you an example. In other words, Cassidy, from your perspective, every time you asked her to do something, she did it. Does that drive credibility? It's cold in here. Let's try another one. Go ahead.
It would drive her credibility in regards to work competence. Like, I asked her to do something, then and she did it, I was like, okay, she's reliable. I trust her in that sense.
Okay, that's fair.
But in regards to the topic at hand, I'm not too sure.
That's necessarily relevant. Fair point. What if we changed it around? What if everything Cassidy had told you in the last 2 years you had found to be accurate or true?
Yeah, I would be more obliged to believe her.
Assess her credibility positively. General managers, what are you going to be looking for?
Witnesses.
If he's done it before? Oh, if she's done it before. Interesting.
But you also need to look at it from his side. Has he had this previous experience before? Look at his previous employers. Has this come up in the past? Has this been hidden? If it did, you have to look at it from both sides.
Ethan,
So this is just a kind of
has it come up before?
back to
Yeah.
law. When hiring someone, can you ask that question?
Yeah, do you have any types of human resources challenges that you had? You can ask, but it's real challenging to prove,
Right. Okay.
you know?
Just wanted to see like how in depth, because you can,
Yep.
without a doubt, investigate that because you can go through records that you've had at your establishment. But
Yep.
let's say you moved here to Texas and I'm from some restaurant in New York. A little bit more difficult to dig into that history.
It is.
Possible,
Yeah.
but more difficult.
Yeah, and it's becoming more difficult to do criminal background checks as well. So it's going to be challenging for us, for sure. But I like where you guys are going. We need to look and think about this, right? It's not here. Here's the challenge. Is this just about Cassidy? You have to keep in mind that there's two sides to every story, and you have to not make it's easy for you to say, assumptions, and you can't judge quickly. Do you see why not? If you immediately let your friendship with Cassidy color your judgment, right? If you guys had worked with her for a long time, or you guys did, you could easily alienate Ethan quickly, right? And it might not be fair. And from a legal perspective, it can be really dicey to do that if it turns out to be a false claim. Which I know you would never do, but anyway, that's fine. You provide with the evidence, that's right, yeah. And today, just ask this lady Omarosa, man, there's evidence everywhere. It's pretty crazy what's going on. Zach.
So I've actually seen this situation happen at a previous employer, and the way the GM handled it, I thought it was very respectable. He sat each person down, talked to them individually, got their sides of the story, asked other coworkers, conducted his own evidence, and then simply just did a scheduled differencing. They never saw each other at work for 4 months. The situation diffused. You know, I mean.
And they made sure it never happened again. That's crucial. Very good. Okay.
I mean, that's a way to eliminate it. Not necessarily, it doesn't justify the, instantaneous part of it, but.
That if he was actually guilty of like doing that to the waiters, he just got away with it.
It does. It avoids the problem, but it does. But I don't think, like, you have to have evidence that he actually did it. You know what I mean? So I think that's a way to find like a problem.
It's a conundrum when it's he said, she said, or today he said, or she said, she said. And you have to be able to measure that. And sometimes, Andy, your point is really good. Sometimes you don't know for sure. So you have to fashion a solution that addresses that conundrum. Yeah. But then you...
Or it would just be like anything a girl ever says is right. If they actually like went and like got rid of like say it was it could have been.
Just assume she's right.
Yeah. If you just make that assumption.
These days because so many girls do that already. They pull the credit cards like it's the credit card and go their way.
So it's important that you be mindful of those things, right? And that we not make assumptions, and that we, in our leadership capacities, that we use fair-minded judgment. After sifting away the relevant from the irrelevant, because people are friends with Cassidy, and she's well liked in the organization, is that relevant or irrelevant to your decision-making process? Irrelevant. What would be relevant? You guys are quick to say irrelevant. If you know it was irrelevant, you got to know what's relevant. What would be relevant? Witnesses would be relevant. When and the metrics around the location and timing and how it happened. Their statements would be relevant. What about their credibility? Yeah, their credibility would be relevant. The other things you talked about, had it ever happened before? That's an interesting thought. Is that always relevant? It's not. Here, let me give you an example. Just going on right now. Who's the woman that was going out with Anthony Bourdain? Is it Is she French or Italian? Italian, I think. Asia? Isn't her name Asia? And she spoke out mightily against Harvey Weinstein and had significant facts, had great credibility. Now, apparently, at about that same time, or before, or sometime during the Me Too thing was cooking, she apparently was negotiating with a minor who she allegedly had sexually assaulted, and it appears that facts look like it did, and she was settling with him. Well, the question, Ethan, is that relevant to her claim against Weinstein? Andy says no. Cassidy says possibly. Madison, what do you think? Possibly? Malik says it shouldn't. Why not?
Well, I mean, I can understand you wanting to link it, but it's too separate.
Yeah, and they were years apart when those two things occurred, right? Does the fact that she did that preclude her from ever being treated that way herself? Yeah. But do you think a large part of public opinion will now, do you think it dilutes her claim, at least in public opinion, about her claims against Harvey Weinstein? And you can see why, right? But look, you need to realize that as a leader and a professional in an organization, you can't let the internal public opinion drive your decision making, because you'll lose respect when you do that. You need to make decisions based on facts, investigatory facts and conclusions, and then make your decisions. And look, make no mistake about it. You're going to have to make choices like that and to do investigations like that. Many of you are going to end up in human resources. Many of you are going to end up as GMs and leaders and developers and owners of your own businesses. And you're going to be involved in situations like that. And I hope you'll reach back and practice some of these critical thinking processes, because they'll help you make better choices going forward and better decisions. Okay, good. Okay. Now, we mentioned, let's keep going. Did you get a chance to read about Bloom's taxonomy in the reading packet? Did anybody see that? No? I'm getting a lot of blank looks like, what are you talking about? All right, well, let me walk you through this, and then I think you'll come upon it here in the next day or two when you're preparing for a little bit for Tuesday or next Thursday. Benjamin Bloom was an educator. And he developed a taxonomy of learning. Now, are thinking and learning two different things? Keep that in mind. We've been talking about thinking. We're transitioning now to learning. Okay? He developed what's known as a taxonomy. What's a taxonomy? A what? Well, kind of. Keep going. A taxonomy. Any botanists in here? Biologists? Like a dissection, like a method. It's a, what'd you call it? Taxidermy. No, not quite. It's a classification system or a categorization system. Yes? That's exactly what it is, Amanda. Just exactly right. And that's so it's a classification of those tiers of learning. Tiers, T-I-E-R-S. Right? Like think of think about this classroom. Each one builds on the next. Just like Amanda said, right? All right, so his first level of taxonomy, of learning taxonomy, is understanding. So, that's right, what'd you say, Haley? I was just thinking that through. I don't think I was right. Thank you. It is knowledge. I was just sitting there going, that's not right. That's the second one. Knowledge is the first one. So, if you memorize something, have you gleaned some information or gotten something that you didn't know before? Is that fair? Yeah. But did you have to think a lot in order to do that? No. Right? Now, if I asked you, and we can use a menu as an example. If I asked you to memorize a menu, do you have to think a lot in order to memorize the menu? No. You're just memorizing it, right? You can spit it back out. We call it rote, R-O-T-E. You memorize it. You can regurgitate it. It doesn't take much work mentally to memorize. It takes time, right, and practice. But that's not thinking. Now, if I asked you to describe to me, Ali, the menu items, to prove to me that you understand them and comprehend them, does that take some thinking? It does, doesn't it? It takes more than just memorizing it. You've got to think about it, right? And then describe it back to me in your own words. It shows to me that you understand it, right? All right? So we've got, do you have to know the menu before you can describe it? Right? So we're building on that. Okay? The third one. Haley, you got it there? Application. Exactly right. So we have knowledge. We comprehend it. Sarah, what's an example of applying our knowledge about the menu? Mm-hmm. Yeah, teaching it to somebody else or taking an order maybe and explaining it at the table, right? Very good. Next. Analysis or analyzing. Yeah, exactly. So now we can analyze that. What does analyze mean? Myers? Keep going. Go deeper than that. Exactly. Very good. I'm going to break it down into its parts. So Warren, how do we analyze a menu?
You could analyze which items pair well together.
Hold on to that thought. Before we go there, that's our next step. Stay on analyzing and breaking down the parts of a menu. The ingredients. Something else to add?
Same thing as ingredients, but like
Allergies, calories, nutritional aspects. You see? Is that important today? Crucial. You can't just hire people that can memorize a menu. You need to hire people that can apply it and analyze, explain it, apply it, and analyze it, right? Okay, now, Warren, what else can we do? This is the stage we call synergy or synergizing.
The pairing the menu items together, which wines go well with which dishes. Also, saying if people have special dietary needs, understanding which sections of the menu might be most relevant and most enjoyed by them. If they're vegan, they might enjoy more of the vegetable options. Or applying your knowledge of the menu to specific scenarios, so that way you can be successful.
Connecting all the dots. Exactly. Or realizing, as you pointed out, that this person has a food allergy, so these items would be good for you, but not these, right? But you have to be able to analyze it before you can make that judgment. Yeah? And then his top one is evaluation. How do we evaluate a menu? Warren, another thought.
For evaluation of the menu, you could see how relevant the items are to the clientele that's targeted.
Okay.
Price point. Basically, evaluation of the menu, you can see how the quality of the items relate to one another, quality of the ingredients, how those are affecting the dishes, the clientele targeted, is that being met?
Yeah.
And also the satisfaction, I guess, have with the items available.
Very cool stuff. And how about taste? In just individual, right? We could do that too, couldn't we? As a very baseline concept. So do you see, though, that at each stage you had to think a little more to accomplish it? Does everybody get that? Okay. So why that's important is because you want to, we're trying to, as teachers, we're trying to exercise your critical thinking skills. Right? So when I ask you to go out and read something, if you just go read it and come back in, you've gathered some information. That didn't take much thinking, did it? But if I ask you then to explain the concept to us, like Alexandra, I asked her to tell us the, what I asked you to tell us? Oh, the critical thinking stages. She was able to explain that, right? And then I reached out to several of you to explain it in more detail, which demonstrated comprehension and required a little more thinking. Right, Court? You had to think a little more to come up with credibility versus friendship. And then if I asked you to write a paper on critical thinking, to tell me in your own words about critical thinking and to use research resources, and you only get one page to do that in, do you see how you're going to need to apply the critical thinking process in order to accomplish that assignment? Right? Because in order to take a whole lot of information and make it very cogent and succinct, what do you have to do? Do you have to break it down? You got to break it down. You got to put some pieces back together. Do you have to evaluate? You have to evaluate because you only get one page. So you've got to decide this information is more important than this information. Okay? So when in this class, when we ask you to do things, that's why we're trying to push you into the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy of learning. Because science has shown us that the higher levels of learning that we work in, the greater the thinking will occur and the more we will learn. All right? That's what we will do. Now, we'll do one other stage in this class, and it's a stage that I kind of add on to his taxonomy. I don't know if anybody else does, but I do, and I call it teaching. I think we learn the most when we teach others. So when you write your paper, think about teaching somebody something. What have I learned about critical thinking that I think is very cool and important, and I want to convey that to other people? When you do your presentations, you will be teaching. When you work in your teams, you will be teaching. Everybody? You get that? All right. Let me make this comment. I am going to ask you to write a paper on critical thinking. We're going to talk about that on Tuesday. But I want everybody to understand Bloom's taxonomy of learning is not critical thinking. It's a method to increase critical thinking. But in and of itself, it is not an example of critical thinking. Okay? So please, in your paper, don't focus on Bloom's taxonomy. Everybody good there? In your paper, you want to focus on our discussion from Tuesday and today and what you read and the other resources that you're going to find. All right. So, let's do this. Would you mind passing these out on this side? No, would you mind passing these out on this side? Now we're going to pass these out, and please don't start until everybody has one.